You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinesic.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinesic, and welcome to episode 76. So Fran and I were just talking about, we've made it way further than we ever thought we would.
We were just saying, we thought at this point we would run out of ideas or directions to go, but early on it was a more narrow focus on native plants, and we've really encompassed ecology, and sustainability.
It seemed like every time we'd have a guest on, they'd say, "Oh, you really need to talk to so and so," and then or someone else would reach out and, "Oh, we got to fit them in." And there's people that I've invited and they couldn't do it quite yet, and I'm like, "Oh, I got to circle back still to some of these folks."
Or even during an episode, we'll have a conversation with a guest, and it will go in a direction we never expected, and it kind of opens our eyes, and it changes what we think and what we feel, and it moves us in a whole different direction. Even today's guest was referred to us from a past guest.
Yeah, and today's guest is really unique because we've talked about open spaces and how they can be great places for pollinator habitat or just native plants,
or even
like parks and golf courses, even those kind of places,
or even unexpected places. Like we talked about, one of our early episodes was Audubon International with Monarchs in the Rough, where they were using golf courses for monarch habitat, and it's not necessarily the place you would think of for monarch habitat.
Yeah, but there's other places that have lots of open space, and Darryl Kabeski from, I don't remember what episode number, our first rooted discussions about the business of native plants, he said, "Oh, you know what? I was just talking to this guy. You got to talk to him because what they're doing is really, really cool." So, and fortunately, I was already met our guest today, so I was able to reach out to him on LinkedIn, and we were able to get this together pretty quick. So, Gregg, why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about where you're working now and what you're doing.
Super. Thanks, Tom and Fran, for having me on. It's always a pleasure because the work that I do is work that is important, and importance is relative, and so but you'll understand, and the audience will understand why it's a unique place where it's happening, and also it's making some very good use of some of this wonderful outdoor space. So my name is Gregg Tepper. I am a horticulturist, and I am the horticulturist at Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill Cemeteries. So we have two locations, and both locations combined are an arboretum. And so our focus at the cemeteries naturally is eternal rest. It's for places for people to be buried. And there's a lot of history there, but there are many facets to the cemetery that you're going to find out about today. And I'm really excited to tell you about things that you would never think of a cemetery as being a place to experience.
I don't know if Tom knows this story, but I have not been to West Laurel Hill Cemetery, but I have been to Laurel Hill Cemetery. And my one experience was I saw a concert there. I saw the Dead Milkmen perform a concert at Laurel Hill Cemetery. So that's
right.
And that's something you don't think of as a venue, a concert venue, but I know it was a fundraiser for the cemetery, and that's why it was there. But that was my first experience with it. But this experience is completely different, and it was an eye opener for me because it's something that's kind of crossed my mind and wondered why some of these practices maybe weren't practiced at a cemetery. And then this whole experience for me has been such an eye opener. So we think the best place to start this off is, I think, for most people, when they think of cemeteries, they don't think of habitat. They don't think of sustainability as far as native plants or ecology. But
Exactly.
that's not the case here. And I want us just to tell us a little bit about those things at West Laurel Hill Cemetery.
You bet. It'll be my pleasure. So once again, there's two locations. There's one in Bala Cynwyd, which is 187 acres, and that's West Laurel Hill. And then there's Laurel Hill Cemetery, which is in the East Falls section of Philadelphia, about 3 miles from here. I'm at West Laurel Hill today. And so both combined locations are considered one arboretum. And so naturally, the arboretum, our status as an arboretum, first of all, is a level 2 ArbNet accredited arboretum. What that means is we very carefully curate what's in the collection of trees and shrubs and plants. And this is what's really fun. I get to tell my colleagues, yeah, I work on a living collection at a cemetery.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
When I first looked at the website and the work that was being done, it was obvious to me that the cemeteries are different from other cemeteries. And you know what? I guess I don't make it a practice of visiting a lot of cemeteries. It's funny. I've probably been to more than 2 dozen, and just out of curiosity to walk around. But I feel that what you're doing is different. So I'd like to know what makes your cemeteries different. And if I'm wrong, if it's not that different compared to maybe other parts of the country, I don't know. Is there a like a cemetery like network almost where you share what each of you are doing?
Yeah. There definitely is. First of all, it's a very broad answer to that question about maybe what makes you different from other cemeteries or unique. I would say, first of all, we're what's called a rural cemetery. When we were founded, the first location, Laurel Hill, was founded in 1836. And it was called rural because it was well outside of the city of Philadelphia. It was located there because people wanted to get away from the city. They wanted to get away from the city graveyards that weren't as organized or also as thoughtfully laid out. It was very important to people, especially at that time, including our founder, John J. Smith. He founded the cemetery because of a personal experience he had with where his daughter was buried in Philadelphia. So he said, I want to create a rural cemetery, and that was modeled after Mount Auburn, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And so it came to 1836 and the cemetery came to be. And it was very unique in that you could come to the cemetery and not only bury a loved one, but beautiful, beautiful monuments. So it's also what makes us different than so many others. We have an incredible collection of sculpture, of art, carved monuments that are just astoundingly beautiful. So there's that. But John J. Smith also realized that horticulture was important to him, and the setting was a perfect place for a collection of trees and shrubs, as well as gardens. So that was really our mission from the very beginning, to not only create a place for people to bury loved ones, but also to think about the setting. And it was a landscape style. So in 1836, people weren't doing that. So this was very much like a park to people, but it was also a collection of plants. It was a place to enjoy and stroll, and really, it was probably one of the most popular places to the public in that time. Another thing you got to laugh at, which I love this story, is that there was a period of time in the 19th century where it was so popular with people in Philadelphia that there was no city parks, there was no state parks, no national parks. So they went to the cemetery, and it was so popular that they had to charge admission for people to come in. So yeah, there was a period of time, but it's still to this day a beautiful place to experience nature, experience plants, shrubs, trees, and I'll certainly delve into more of that. But to back to the question about what makes us unique is that we are an arboretum, and also we have a decided focus on sustainability. That's really important. And we really need to credit a board member, Cliff David, with that focus of focusing on sustainability and making sure that we thoughtfully do many of the things that we do. We think about its impact on the environment, its impact on life, and that it's a habitat. It's a place where living organisms reside. And it's an urban forest. It's a fragment in the city. And we have 187 acres in Ballackinwood and 78 acres in the East Falls section of Philadelphia.
I think to me, and I really want to go back to the sustainability part, that because we'd really like to delve into that. But
Sure.
I think, for a lot of people, a cemetery is a place that's very clean and sanitary, and a place they visit, but not necessarily always want to stay. They
Mhm.
want to go. But I agree that it is like a park. I was actually going to ask before you went into it, how many of your visitors today are going to visit someone to pay respects, or they're just there to visit, to walk
Mm.
around and look? Because I would imagine it's a fair amount. All my friends that have been there were just going to spend the day to walk around and be a part of it.
Yeah. With the works that I do in the gardens and the grounds and also working with our arboretum manager, Aaron Greenberg, who I would also recommend that you have Aaron visit the podcast, because Aaron can talk specifically about the trees, about what we're doing with the trees, about the arboretum status and all the things that we do. I certainly will cover many bases, but a show just about the work that he is doing, I think you'd find extremely interesting, because there are state champion trees on both properties. Yeah,
Wow,
so
I didn't know that.
big trees in the state. Yep, some very rare trees. Some also what we do as far as sustainable practices or best management practices to keep our trees healthy, and how they're managed. He does risk assessment, so definitely would recommend that. But as far as again, I guess back to the sustainability aspect, people visit, the visitorship that comes here. First of all, with COVID, this was a place. There's nothing you can just walk in. The public can walk in. It's safe, meaning it is. People can distance themselves. They can certainly wear masks, but people can run. They can run, jog. They can walk. They can walk their dogs. They can cycle. We're near the Kinwood Trail, which is an important part of our visitorship. It's many of them are cyclists, but basically, I would say that the majority of people that visit, it's a balance between those attending a funeral and so forth, and paying respects to loved ones. But many of them are just enjoying the beautiful outdoor space.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's quite a few people going there just to admire the history as well. I know my mother-in-law actually works at a cemetery in Trenton, a particularly old cemetery, and that was one of the things I was surprised by as someone who hasn't visited a lot of cemeteries, that they would get a lot of people who say, "Oh yeah, we're just looking for old grave markers," or "We know that there was such and such person buried here." Not that it was a relative; it was just a historical figure in some way, and they wanted to go and visit it for those reasons. So,
Yes,
yeah, I'd imagine started in 1836. It's probably got to have a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you touched on that, Tom, because I kind of have to move in that direction, because naturally we have a lot of people that say, ask about the people buried here and the history alone. So at Laurel Hill Cemetery, there's some famous people buried there. A more modern famous person is Harry Callis, of course, announcer for the Philadelphia Phillies. So that's another really important. A lot of people come to visit his grave marker at Laurel Hill. And of course, it's a it's a microphone, which is his monument, it's outstanding. And if you're a history buff, General Meade, who helped win the Civil War. So he is also buried there along with family members, which is great to see. And then there's actually a person at Laurel Hill that is technically buried there, but not really there at all.
Really?
Any idea?
Uh,
So you know who's buried there is Adrian Balboa.
Very
that's,
yeah.
I was, because that's from which Rocky movie, Balboa?
Rock-
I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
that's.
so
So
it was
does that still reside there? That
it
grave marker?
yeah. So and her son, of course, too, is there technically.
Yeah.
So the grave markers are there. That was part of the movie, obviously, and we maintain them as regular grave markers. We have them. Planted, landscaped. It looks very nice, and people naturally come to pay their respects to Adrian. So, which is great. So,
That is
you
awesome.
can imagine a lot of interesting people. But I would highly recommend looking into the website of Laurel Hill to find out about the different programs and tours, and you can visit these fascinating sites. And Tom, like if you that's something that friends or your mom or so forth is interested in doing, you can actually have a docent-led tour, and they might say, I want a tour that talks about, I want to go on the tour that talks about all the Titanic survivors. Yes.
Oh wow.
And those that perished on the Titanic. So there's many. Then if we look at the history again at Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill, Laurel Hill's 1836, West Laurel Hill's 1869. You're going to hear more notable people also buried in 1869. You guys baseball buffs at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Totally.
Well, do you know that the father of baseball is buried here at West Laurel Hill Cemetery? Harry?
Abner
Yeah.
Doubleday?
It's actually not Abner Doubleday. It's so of course his name is completely just going right out of my brain at the moment, but it's father of baseball.
Okay.
Is here, and you can see his grave, and also some notable celebrities. We have Teddy Pendergrass is buried here. Yeah, and Grover Washington Jr. is also buried here.
I did not know that.
There's some wonderful notable people like that. How about if you're a history buff, the in Philadelphia, the Billy Penn, correct? The statue?
Yes.
Okay. So the famous sculptor, Alexander Calder, is also buried here, and as well as his wife. So that's you can imagine with all the different famous people that we have, there's something for everybody. I know a lot of people visit Hobie Baker grave, but he was a hockey legend. So if you come just for that, you're going to have a blast. But while you're here, you're also going to see it's a absolutely beautiful setting, and it's full of life. There's so much habitat, urban forest, that is homes to birds and mammals. We have foxes, we have groundhogs, and we have deer. But that's a part of it. But it is a very important part of a habitat. And I look forward to talking more about that with you guys too, and telling you more about how we a very special section of our cemetery as well dedicated to that.
And I think that's what we're working towards, because I definitely want to circle back about sustainability. And one of the things, before we even get there, on something that you said, like I have visited cemeteries before where it looks like, they're probably full, and maybe they've been cared for so long, maybe the funding's not quite there. You can kind of see like they're in ill, disrepair, and that's sad to see in one respect. But
Yes,
you're
agreed.
looking at the opposite. When you think of that, you think about the cost of what it takes to maintain this almost park-like natural setting, which I can't imagine. So and I would imagine the cost for that's got to be even greater. So where did the commitment of the sanctuary's sustainability stem from, and what was the process to get you to where you are today?
So it's really it was a directive from the board for sure. The board, when they meet, they're always thinking about what is our past. Let's celebrate the past. And what's our present, what's currently happening, what are the trends, and what's the future? So let's embrace the future. So keeping that in mind, as I mentioned, one of the board members, Cliff David, said that this is really an important aspect of what we should be doing. And sustainability is defined broadly by many people. But basically, sustainability, when we look at it ecologically, it's about what do we do and how do we do it, and what are its effects. And it's everything from how do we dig up soil, what happens to the soil, how is it affected, how do we care for the grass, how do we care for the trees, how many trees do we have, and each tree that we have sequesters carbon. How many more trees can we plant? How much more carbon can we sequester? You can see, you can go in many tangents with it, but this was a beginning. They decided, let's look at what we do and how we do it and see how we can do it the best possible way to really make sure that our environment is benefiting as well as the citizens in our area.
For those that don't know about Nature Sanctuary,
sure.
Can we talk about that? Can you explain to our listeners what Nature Sanctuary is?
It would be my pleasure. So, as a part of since sustainability was our focus, this is an aspect of that. And so, interestingly, as more and more people became aware of, well, what happens to me after I die? Where do I go? And we had a traditional way, which many people subscribe to, and understandably so. People find that when they pass, there's a process that people go through to be buried. And it includes embalming, it includes going into a casket. The casket then goes into a cement vault, and the cement vault is buried in the ground. And so people there was really a great awareness of is there another way we can do this? So have you guys both heard of and understand what a green burial process is?
I don't.
No,
I honestly can't say
right.
I do.
Perfect. Okay. So really, green burial is really, it's a burial process that has a much more positive effect, or you could say very little effect on the environment and ecology, which is a good thing. So a green burial basically is no longer using cement vaults, no longer using caskets that don't biodegrade, and no longer using practices that have a negative impact on the environment. So what Nature Sanctuary is Nature Sanctuary is our green burial space. It's a space where when somebody passes away, the typical example is they pass away and they cannot be preserved, so they cannot have the formaldehyde and so forth. And so what happens is the person must be buried in a short term. And when they're buried, they are put into the ground. It's the green burials that we have are hand dug. They are hand dug spaces. They're 4 feet down, and the body is either in a biodegradable shroud, such as linen, silk, or cotton. They can be just the shroud. It could also be a wicker casket or a pine casket that will eventually degrade once it starts to age and so forth. So really, it's very much like the way burials were before the Civil War, when these chemicals and these processes weren't created. And it's a way of returning to the earth. And many people find that to be much more attractive to them. You may have heard the funny old saying, like my father used to say this. He'd say, I don't put no fuss. Just put me in a pine box and bury me. Well,
Yeah.
it's,
I think a lot of people,
it's funny, but it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know that isn't the case. I think a lot of people think they just get buried. Do you know any of the history of why they started using the concrete vaults and the
Yeah.
more ornate casket? I was surprised when a friend of mine actually started a grave digging company, and
Oh, okay.
that's how only reason I knew about a lot of the stuff. I didn't know that was the
All
case
right,
beforehand.
I will say this before we delve into it. I'm today days old about learning about the
Yeah.
cement
Oh yeah.
vault, because I've actually never been to a burial.
Mhm.
Like I'm just learning that today. I didn't even know that existed.
So I have to tell you guys, I've always worked in public horticulture. I've worked in previous jobs, and native plants are my expertise, especially ferns. But when I came to work as a horticulturist at a cemetery, I didn't know about green burial. And I've learned. I didn't know I knew about managing a native plant meadow, and you'll learn more about the green burial. But I had lost my father in 2005. Other than knowing he went into a fancy metal casket, I did not know the whole process either. So I have since learned, and it's nice to know now that we have broader options, and options too that are certainly better on the environment. So to your question, Tom, the cement vault, basically, one of the good things about cement vaults, and I learned this from the operations guys, the guys that also work here and do the burials, is that they can actually put, when somebody buys a lot and they're going to be buried there, they can actually have the concrete vaults can be pre-buried and be ready. So that, and I learned this is what happened with my dad. There was a vault there already, a big cement box with a lid that can be pulled off with a machine. And so once the person passes, the soil's dug, they go down to that vault, and they open it up and they put the casket in, and it stays in there. And it's really, for a very, very long time, it's gonna be there. So the history of body preservation, as I have understood it, and this is something you certainly want to delve into with, if you're of interest, talking to a funeral director that we have here, they're all really cool about talking about stuff like this. So they're like, they'll sit there and, oh yeah, this is, have a drink. Yeah, let's talk about. And so at first I was a little like, ooh, I don't know about this. But the more you understand that death is a part of our life. It's something that we all have to deal with. Some of us deal with it better than others. Some of us pre-plan, and some of us do not. So for those that pre-plan, the cement vault and that works. But you can also do the green burial. But anyway, back to the cement vault and then the formaldehyde. It supposedly came from around the Civil War time. And this was a time when so many had died in the war, that had lost their lives, that they just could not all be buried at the same time. So the idea of preserving the bodies to make them ready for proper burial was the reason why, as I understand, that this came to be. So, but interestingly, before we had a lot of this technology was in place, but as far as how did people get buried in the past before we had machinery and so forth? Well, prior to I'm going to say it's about the 1930s, I believe it is, maybe into the 40s, before we had large machinery, there were what was called receiving vaults. So if it was January and your loved one passed away, they would be put into a receiving vault until the crew was able to dig the soil because it'd frozen. So the receiving vault kept them at a nice chilly temperature and kept them in preserved, as well as the formaldehyde. And then, so isn't this interesting? Here it is, native plant, and we're talking about this, but it all relevant.
We're getting there.
Well, that's where we
that's exactly
before you have the service bury, at least
Yeah.
the folklore behind the name is that that was an indication the ground was
had
thawed enough that
to-
you could start having funeral services.
Oh, I've not heard
Yeah,
that.
so
Oh,
yeah, so Amalanke or that the whole thing, I guess up in the New
I
England
love it.
states, that when it
I
buried, it was warm enough to have
service.
your service.
Oh, cool. Boys, this going to be, I'm going to have fun with this one with the family rep. Guess what? Rub that's actually new. Well, this is cool.
So
Yeah.
for our listeners, that the first time I saw a photo of nature sanctuary, I would have never have known that I was looking at a cemetery. I thought I was looking at a beautiful, just natural meadow.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's what kind of shocked me. And then I was thinking about it, I'm like, that makes sense. You know, to me at least, there's, you know, I'm sure we've all had people said, I don't want you to go to a cemetery to mourn for me. Just sprinkle my ashes somewhere. And but you know, even if you were to do that, you're not guaranteed in the future that that place will exist or still be in the same form as when you sprinkle the ashes. There are no guarantees that way.
Yep.
Even if you want it to be somewhere natural, especially at the rate that we're losing natural spaces. Well, you can have the best of both worlds here.
It's true. I certainly do want to delve into the advantages of green burial and also how we do it. But first, I want to mention that our green burial site, again called Nature Sanctuary, it was originally, the history of it was that they decided in 2008 that they wanted to start this, but it was a newer idea and process at that point, and there was much still to be learned. Also, in learning about how to best manage it, like how. So if we do a green burial, do we do it in the rest of the cemetery? Well, they decided to have a specific area that this was done, and they also started to realize, well, so if it's a green burial area, we keep it a natural space. That means the grass doesn't get mowed. Okay, the grass doesn't get mowed. And so the thought was, we'll just let it return to a natural environment. Well, you know, in Bala, Kenwood, the natural environment also includes things like porcelain berry, stinging nettle, and mugwort. So that was the very beginnings. And it wasn't as attractive looking as they had hoped or wanted. So fortunately, along the process, after several of the burials had happened, it became apparent that we needed to have a new approach. So they actually hired a landscape architect to help with that, Adam Suplee. And what he was able to do was come up with a whole management strategy and process for the area. And it was his to come up with what was called a managed succession meadow.
Was anyone else doing this at this time? Did you have anywhere to look to see an example, or was this something?
I believe so, but I don't. That part of the story, I don't know. I really don't know what. So I came to this. I came to this in March of 2019, and I've been learning ever since. But that's a great question, Pran. I will have to find out for you, because I would assume so, that there's others, but I'm not too aware. I know when I do lectures I'll be doing one for the Green Burial Council. The purpose for my lecture is because of the interest in that as a managed succession meadow. So, so his idea was that, okay, it starts out as a sunny space. Okay, you've got burials happening. It's going to be disturbed from time to time and so forth. But once the burials are in place, does it remain a sunny meadow with meadow plants, or how do we manage it thereafter? So the idea was that we would start with a sunny meadow with native plants, exclusively native plants, and I'll get into why exclusively native in a bit. And then from that, we put in native shrubs and young native trees, so that over time, and with succession, the sunny plants will eventually become vying with the shrubs and the trees for light. The trees will get bigger, the shrubs will get larger, and there'll be fewer sun-loving herbaceous plants, more trees and tree canopy, more shrubs, and fewer herbaceous plants, but the herbaceous plants that will remain will be those that live in a woodland. So ferns, sedges, and woodland plants. So that's what you will see. And the time period for the succession is planned to be about 100 years. So I will not be here when all that comes to its zenith, its final point. But I'm here at the very beginning, and I have the ability. Aaron and I work together on this for sure, but I have the ability to make the choices about the plant material that's there. And a big part of that is not just the managed succession, isn't just so that we're doing, it's certainly an ecological step, but it's also about perception, because perception's everything. When people come to see it and they see something that's beautiful, something that's, we give them obvious cues that we care for it and nurture it. And my favorite word is I steward it. I really take care of it. It's not something that is just maintained. It's really cared for. And so it starts to become a very special space, because it's not only beautiful, but it supports wildlife. When I saw this summer all the goldfinches visiting, and I've seen interesting birds that like kinglets and so forth that are visiting, that are using this space and are native pollinators. They love it. The bees go crazy for the monarda and the salvias. And we have the salvia azurea in there, and all the different mint family members and goldenrods. So there's that. And then there's another very important aspect of it. When those people that have lost their loved ones come to visit. And let me tell you guys, if I didn't think there was a reason to do this, like, I love the plants, of course. I love gardening. I love caring for it. But when I have a family member say to me, I'll give you an example, Steph Bruneau, whose husband is buried there. I remember the day I met her. She said, "Are you Gregg?" I said, "I am, yes." She said, "You take care of this now, don't you?" I said, I do. She said, "Well, I just want to introduce myself. My husband is buried here." And she said, "What you're doing means all the world to me. You're taking care of the space at which my husband is now eternally resting. And you have no idea how comforting that is." And she and I both got emotional about it. I couldn't help it. I was like, wow, so we're making a big difference. And so sustainability at Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill, naturally, West Laurel Hill is the site for Nature Sanctuary. But you can see we take it very seriously, and it has far-reaching, wonderful effects. It really does.
To me, it's not even. And I apologize. You just sparked like 20 questions, so I'm trying to like bring it back, bring it back. But like to me, like, that's not even someone with their final resting place, because now they're part of a living ecology. Like, just the fact that it could have been chosen to remain a meadow, and we know that in our area, meadows are part of successional forest, and they want to become a forest over time, especially with the amount of rain we get. So you could have done all the work to keep it a meadow, or it's consistently changing and it's in a growth manner. So even though it's someone's final resting place, they're a part of that ecology. They're helping the growth of this whole area.
Yep.
In essence.
And you think back to, well, before humans were at that site, and then even right after that was something that happened, is you'd have animals that would die, and they would eventually go back into the earth. Or it had people that died, whether it's Native Americans and they would eventually go back into the earth. And that was a part of that's been missing, really, from a lot of our landscape, because we've confined it to smaller areas. But this is. And then eventually, like you said, with the vaults, we made it so it wasn't even a part of the cycle.
Well, I guess that's one of my questions, is how popular has nature sanctuary become over time? Because it is a change of perception of what most people would think as a resting spot for their loved ones. So it's different, and it's not, I guess, but I guess to me, it's almost radically different of how you perceive it, and it's a change of perception, and people don't always want their perceptions changed. They want
Exactly.
tradition.
Exactly. And so we're sensitive to that. I know many people that they do like the traditional burial and the advantages of that to them. And I totally get it. And then there are those that also choose this option, and they're so happy to have the different options. And so that's a big plus. So yes, very quickly, just back to the meadow aspect. The fact that it's going to be a meadow is going to mean that's going to be that way for quite some time.
Yeah.
But when you're asking about how popular is it, well, guess what? It's sold out.
Wow.
We have pre-sold the spaces within the current nature sanctuaries parameters right now. So there's two types. One is called an at need and what's called a pre-need. So pre-need are people that say, they're planning and so forth. They look at their options and they say, green burial is for me. This is what I want. So they pre-need, and they buy a space. They can also buy a space for their spouse. And so the fact is, they can go in at one point and their spouse can go in next to them at another point. So we keep track of where people are buried naturally in the space. That's important. But then there's also at need. And sometimes there may be a situation, let's say, where someone left in their will that they've decided they want a green burial option. Maybe the family didn't know, or for whatever reason, at the very last minute, somebody might have said a traditional burial, and they say, you know what, I've decided I want to be green burial. And so family members, when the person passes, need to immediately find this option. And so we have our at need. So you might be asking, okay, well, if you're sold out, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to expand. And so we're going to continue for those spaces where people have pre-bought. They can remain. They're always going to be there for them. And when their time comes, they'll be buried in the meadow there. And we will clear the plants, cut them back. The hole will be dug, and then we replant and reestablish where that one burial went. But now the expansion is going to be flanking on the left and right sides. And so this part of it, for me as a horticulturist, is also exciting because I literally get to plan and design the plants that are going to go in prior to those burials, and then what will go in afterwards. So it's a really great honor, I feel, and a really unique I love the word honor, honestly, but it's really a unique position to be in, to do a design for Native Meadow as a place that people will be buried. Yeah.
So I feel that the service that you're providing is a service to both honoring the living and the dead, because you're preserving the food web and pollinators and ecology for future generations, because that's greatly needed. Plus, it's honoring in such a beautiful way loved ones that had passed. So I know this is a weird question, but and then we're going to move more towards the plant material. But is there any incentives for cemeteries to do this, or is this just something done out of the love for it?
I'm going to say the incentive is, well, first of all, let me say it's not about it's less expensive. People sometimes, it's got to be less expensive. There's no embalming, there's no special casket. Those are small parts of the price. What it's about is having the staff and the resources at hand to keep maintaining it. It has to be maintained, and that's the part of it, especially as a natural space. In order for it to not only appear well, but keep out invasives, make it a space that the public can use, because people can walk in with their dogs. They can just enjoy the space. It is really beautiful. It's a place you want to kind of sit down and just watch the bumblebees and the birds. Yeah, so like a park. So there's that. But I would say the incentive is to offer people the option, so that that you're coming to a place that is really thinking about the needs of the individuals, as varied as they can be. There's also religions that this is much more of approachable type of burial for them, for their beliefs. So that's an important aspect too. So there is certainly appeal to many because of this. So that would be the incentive, I would say.
To me, you've already thought about the future. You've already planned or thinking or caring about the future, which is an important aspect that I don't think you always get. Which I love.
Yeah.
So,
and if you also, I just wanted to mention very quickly, if you also back to the fact that the board is thinking about the past, about the present, and about the future, because this is a beautiful space. It's 187 acres here at West Laurel Hill. So if it's when that day comes where maybe they say it is totally full, what's it going to be after that? Is it going to be, it's going to always be a place for people to come and enjoy the beautiful landscape. So I think that's way, way, way far off. That's way in the distance, but it's thinking again about the future. And that's what the board does. They think about these things, including naturally our CEO, Nancy Goldenberg. She helps lead the board in a lot of these decisions that are made and so forth, and the thought about what's the cemetery about and why is it doing what it's doing, things like that. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
well, I know you're looking forward to this part, but we want to talk a little bit about the plant choices and the choices for the sanctuary.
Yeah,
and I was really, I said it earlier, kind of shocked to know that you're planning for succession.
Yeah.
What kind of went into that decision? Because like I said, you didn't have to do that, but over
So
time,
that originally was really Adam Suplee's thought. His I would say it was really his idea. I've come on board at a point where they needed someone to manage it, that had the know-how and the expertise to do so. So, but yeah, that really, he was hired as a consultant, and it also, because that was his idea. I can't comment on how he came up with it, but I do know he was made aware that sustainability was at the heart of it. Awesome. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And we can justify it. Yeah. But awesome. Just a couple there's definitely some more things to tell you guys about. I think you're going to really enjoy, but I'll certainly let you continue with your questions.
No problem. Then I want to hear it. So I guess one of my questions is, when you're creating a naturalized area and you're going to be expanding, what are you looking at as far as your model for what is native? Are you looking at what is native to Bala Cynwyd? And what would have been there, or is it a broader sense of native, just kind of something more localized?
Excellent. Well, great question. And this is where I think my background in native plants and knowing about the variety of choices of native plants is important. So I'd like to begin with how I define a native plant.
Okay.
I use the classic Doug Tallamy native plant explanation. If it fills a role in ecology, it benefits our native pollinators and our wildlife, and they can utilize it and create a habitat from it, and it's usable to them. It's a native plant of value, and that's how I make my choices. Mm-hmm. So when I think of plants that are going to go in there, I'm thinking about what will be the benefiting pollinators and insects, and of course mammals and wildlife, birds and so forth. Okay. So that also is my best management practices. Also have to support that. If I have echinaceas or I have other seed producing plants, they're only as good. They bloom and they're beautiful and they serve the bumblebees. But if I completely cut them down to the ground before the seeds are eaten by the goldfinches, I have kind of missed that aspect of it. So I'm always thinking, well, this is what. Now, what about how and why? How and why I'm doing these things. So my plant choices for the expansion especially are certainly going to be, once again, pollinator benefits, wildlife benefits. And also I need to put in plants that are going to be beautiful. That's important too, because aesthetics are important to humans, how it's perceived and what it looks like. But I also have to think about this other critter, the deer. So we are in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and the deer density here is about 40 deer per square mile. So I've got deer visiting all the time. So my best management practices need to also counter that. And how I deal with the deer is I try to find deer-resistant native plants, of which there are some. I wrote a book about it. And so, and so they do exist, but there's also strategies such as deer repellents. We can't keep the deer out. We don't have a deer fence. And we're a cemetery. So there's access really all the time, especially during the day, to the property. So what I have to do is I have to figure out my strategy. Okay, I've got a good balance of plants that deer don't like, but the ones that they do like, that I do want to include, I just have to make a part of my care for the area is spraying for these for the repellents and applying repellents for the deer. So that's another part of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
When starting out, because this was land that was already part of the cemetery, was the land fallow? Like, were you coming in with almost pristine soil that was still
interesting,
rich and untouched, or were you dealing with maybe something where it had been handled differently 100 years ago and you're just dealing with what you're dealing with?
Yeah, great question. And this is the other thing that completely blows people's minds. It was originally the dump.
Wow.
That's what it was. And so there was a period of time in the past where if it was any debris, whether it was old rocks, it wasn't necessarily so much trash as I understand. It was really just debris from the cemetery, like logs. Where'd you put branches? Where'd you put, the flowers that got put on the grave? I don't even know what all went into the dump. I just know that it was the dump, and it wasn't a place that was a positive place. And so they decided to completely redo it and rethink it, and boy, in a big way. So it was remediated. The soil was remediated. They took rock, they took debris out of it, and so forth. They also built the soil. They added organic matter. So in the primary middle section, nature sanctuary, it was originally a dump. Now the flanking sections on the left and the right side, those were more of the original soil, not as disturbed as some of the other areas. And so moving forward, those areas, I'm really going to just keep them pretty much as they are. I'm not a big soil amendment person unless it's soil that is highly already manipulated and in bad shape. Most of our native soils are really actually pretty decent and provide the plants with the things they need. So, but I'll certainly delve into that too.
Yeah. Where you're at, it's Piedmont.
So we are. Let's see. Yes, we are still considered. This is Piedmont. Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So
close to the edge of coastal plain, but right, correct.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I know that line is somewhere through there, so I just wasn't quite sure what it would be considered. So, and I would have guessed having some state trees on those properties, there are still some, because I would imagine early on there were things planted that weren't native, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, primarily. It was very popular for European and Asian trees. A lot of ginkgo bilobas. That was something that was planted. There was a popular tree in the past. Unfortunately, there was a lot of female ginkgos. They of course have the stinky fruit. So so there certainly was that. So it was we've already determined it was a dump. It was remediated. It was improved. It was made into nature sanctuary. And so another part of the wonderful aspect of the fact that this is it's how we care for it. It's what's there. We actually were able to achieve Sites Gold status.
And I would love for you
Yeah.
to explain what that is.
Yes, absolutely. It would be my pleasure. So basically Sites, SITES, is an initiative, and it's a to put it, probably the most basic I can say is it's been defined by the Sites initiative that these are the best management practices you should follow in order to make sure that everything you're doing, what you're doing, and why you're doing it meets the criteria. And so that means that your best management practices do not impact the environment negatively. You only positively affect them. So that means I do not use chemical herbicides. The only herbicide I use, besides a lot of hand pulling and things like that, is horticultural vinegar mixed with orange oil. That's very, very effective, especially in the hot weather for weeds. So we do that. No fungicide use by any means. And if we were going to have no pesticides for sure, no chemicals. So if we're going to have an issue with a certain insect, the insects are going to have to kind of fight it out. And we have a threshold. We just have to realize not all the plants are going to look this perfect. And if there was something that I thought is really infested, if I was going to have any kind of something I would do, again, a best management practice, I would choose an IPM approach, integrated pest management, where I would get native insects that you can purchase, such as ladybugs, to take care of things like the leafhoppers or the aphids, things like that. So there's that. Also, Sites Gold requires that we think about, will the public benefit? How will they benefit from this? So it's engaging. It's a place of beauty. We also have interpretive signage so that people understand what it is and why it's happening and how we take care of it. So there's that aspect. And then my best management practices also have to consider rainwater mitigation. So if we have permeable or impermeable surfaces, I am responsible for how that water is dealt with. We don't put it into a gully and out to a sewer. It stays on the property so that it can be gathered and then goes into a rain garden and then back into the soil and into the aquifer. So keeping it in place reduces obviously runoff in a large way. And then the other part of it that not a lot of people think about, that I'm very proud of how I manage, is I manage the soil. I think that the soil is much more than just dirt. Or as I remember my soils professor in college said, dirt is what's under your fingernails. Soil is what you plant plants in. So I always like that.
I like that too.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
That is awesome.
Isn't that super? Yeah. So it's really thinking about the life of the soil. So I have to make sure that there are trees, shrubs, and plants that are sequestering carbon. That's an important aspect. But the soil life, I add leaf mulch. Leaf mulch helps to absorb rainwater. Leaf mulch helps to add organic material, build the soil nutrient value, build the soil structure, makes it excellent structure, getting it ready for that woodland it's going to be someday. And it also feeds our soil life, the soil fungi and the soil bacteria that are so important and live hand in hand with these plants. We often forget just how important our soils are. And so I have a lot of responsibility to do this. And when I say a lot of responsibility, it's a pleasure and an honor to steward this. I'm not. It's a good responsibility.
A great responsibility, and it's you actually kind of touched on, and I know you had mentioned earlier, like it has to be beautiful. You have people that are visiting that are seeing loved ones and want a good experience, but especially working with the soil, are you able to do some of those practices? Like, do you have to rake the leaves up? Are you able to leave the perennials until they drop seed and
Yeah,
let
great.
insects overwinter before you cut them back? Or is that acceptable to your patrons to do that, or is it a compromise?
Yeah, so excellent question. So once again, back to sustainability, we have to think about the good words of recycle, reuse, repurpose. How can we think that way? Before something's disposed of, how can we use it? So you can imagine, with hundreds of trees in this arboretum, we've got a few leaves. So what happens with the leaves? The leaves are collected off the surfaces on many places where they have to be picked up, and we reuse them. They do not. They're either composted or made a part of a compost that soil is reused. We build a soil that also goes into other parts of the cemetery, and those leaves go down in nature sanctuary. It becomes a part of how I take care of mitigating weeds and that whole thing I talked about earlier. So the leaves come from the property. So we reuse them, repurpose them, if you will, recycle all that wonderful lignin and carbon and so forth. So that's where that comes from. Yeah.
I love so much of this conversation. I was so happy to hear about the rain garden and the water capturing and filtration and all of this reusable. It just makes me feel so good. I don't know how else
and
to.
The sites program, as far as I understand, is fairly new.
It is.
It's within like the last decade or so, I think.
Yes. And so what it really does is it gives people parameters. It gives them guidelines of what they should follow if they want to really build a better environment or steward a better environment. So there's a Sites Gold certification, and we've achieved it. And as I understand, I think we're the only green burial area that has such a certification that I'm aware of. And so we're very proud of that, really are. So, but the way that I talk about this garden is I like to say it's a garden to feel good about, because you feel good about it when you know everything that goes into it or doesn't go into it and what its benefits are. You can't help but walk away. This is a good space. It really is. And I think you guys probably have already figured out you're not going to be able to get away without visiting. I got to have Tom.
Totally.
You got to come see this. So
I was already thinking, when am I going to be in that area?
Well,
I could
we'll come
visit.
Yeah. I guess I want our listeners to realize just the amount of work, because a natural space and having a natural space doesn't mean you just let it go and it remains natural. It's maintenance, and the word that you keep using, which is such a crucial word, is steward. You're stewarding this land because it is a cemetery, so you do have disturbed soils. I'm sure invasives have to be. You already mentioned how much of an issue are invasives at the location?
So invasives are a huge issue. In fact, when I took on managing it, the majority of what was there had been completely overwhelmed with mugwort, stinging nettle, porcelain berry, Japanese hops. We had it all in the neighboring properties. It's all coming in. You know how quickly they invade. So that's a part of the job, is just getting it under control. And I've been working on this since I started in March 2019. It took me a full year to fully get it all behind me to see what do I have to do next but now I'm in a place where I know what I got to do and I know what's got to have to happen. And we're still playing catch up. We're trying to catch up for all the years that it was not. The other part of it too, in honesty, is the company had the green burial area, but they just didn't have the staff to take care of it. And I don't think it's a fault that goes to anybody. It's just that so many of us, you guys have probably had this experience with gardens. They take a lot of time. They just do. But if we start to realize the time that we're taking is a positive investment, it's an investment. It is a lot of work, yes. But once you get to what I call that sweet spot where there's the right balance, less effort has to go into having the same result. Yep. So, and I'm just trying to turn the tide. I've got this big, I'm trying to push back these invasives. But if incrementally you keep hammering at it, you do get it under control. And the other key word here is consistent care. Not just, okay, I'll work on it in 2 weeks or I'll work on it next month. It's consistently going in. It's just a part of the deal.
How much new planting still occurs? Is that something that doesn't end? Is it a constant keeping up?
Yep. Yes. Yep. So I've gotten to a point where some of the areas are what I would call fully planted, but they still have reservations in them. So a spouse where someone had passed and a spouse then dies, they have to, their reservation or their space is opened up again. So things do get dug up. But as you guys know, native plants are very resilient. If they can get established and they're in good shape, we can really cut them back for all the surrounding area from where the hole will be dug. It's dug, and the plants that were in that footprint from that rectangle for where the body goes, those are dug out, and so forth. If I can save them, I do, but not always is it possible to save them, because they have to really chop through plants to be able to dig. But the surrounding plants, they get cut down, and they come back. It's especially depending on the time of year. In fact, I've seen some where they get cut back and it's almost like they're really happy they got cut back, because they're like, oh, okay, a new life. Yeah. So it's pretty cool. Yeah. Huh?
This is just a little side thing that just popped up in my mind. Was everyone loves that graphic of like how deep the native plant roots go. I would assume that it's probably a lot harder to dig that, especially since it's dug by hand, to dig that grave, since you're not going through turf grass, you're going through all this native plant roots.
Right.
You get to actually see that like side profile where you see how deep the roots are going.
I have seen a grave dug. I've been there to see the hole is dug, but I've never really looked at the roots. Mm-hmm. I can't say that I've actually perceived them. I just know from what I've learned. And I've also know from when I've tried to dig certain ones out. Once they're established, there's a reason why they do so well. They've got those deep roots, and the grasses especially. So a very quick side note, when I first came on, there were invasives mostly in there, and there were some of the thuggish native plants like Heliopsis, Helianthoides. There was a little bit of a few penstemon and a little bit of Monarda fistulosa, but no grasses were ever part of the original plant palette. There were 18 plants. It was all seeded in. And no grasses were actually a part of it. So I've added Erobrostis, I've added panicums, which I love panicums. And I have been just so happy with stuff that I've gotten from Daryl Kobeski at Sunset Farmstead, because his stuff is so beautifully grown. So that was another thing. It was adding plants that really weren't part of the original plant palette.
Awesome. So and he's following the same methodology that you do at the cemetery as well. So it is a perfect fit.
Yeah, and that's, as far as I understand, that's one of the things that goes into that whole site's accreditation as well, is who you're getting your materials from. And they're
correct, Tom. I'm so glad you said that, because I would like to mention that quickly. So I also have to think broadly. It's not just what I'm doing, it's what people that supply what I need for the cemetery or nature sanctuary are doing as well. So when I learned about what Daryl was doing with his soil mix and so forth, I was really happy about that, because I could actually say, not only are we getting native plants, but we are getting native plants that are grown in a soilless media that also has been thoughtfully pulled together. And it's stuff I can speak about that's important. And so all these things, to some people that might seem like a little detail, but to me, I take it very seriously, and I feel good about it. I feel good that, hey, we got a space that's, it's really having a much more positive effect on the environment than anything else.
I have one more side question.
Sure.
And then I swear I have them all crossed off. So as someone that's having a loved one buried in the nature sanctuary, do you get requests of certain plants they would like to be around them, or if they can sprinkle seed or be a part of it in that way? Is that something that happens?
Yeah. So we do sometimes have a few family members that will bring in plants that, like, we had somebody bring in a hydrangea and try to plant it over the grave. They're technically not supposed to do that. So the family reps tell them, this is what the green burial idea is all about. It's going to be all native plants. We have a horticulturist that takes care of this. However, I've told the family reps, if any family member says, I sure would love to be able to be part of the planting at some point, or in some way, maybe be able to be a part of it, I would welcome that in a heartbeat. I'd say if somebody says, after grandma's planted, I'd really like to come back and have a day where we could put in some special plants. You bet. And it wouldn't just necessarily have to be over where her resting place is. It could be in a whole section there. So I'd love it. I'd love to have people show that kind of interest. Indeed.
Awesome. Yep. I feel like I keep cutting Tom off. Tom, do you have?
Oh, I did have something, but I don't.
Sorry. Every time
that was such a good question.
Tom, every time I start talking, I look up and Tom has his mouth open like he's about to say something, and I just jumped in there. So I feel guilty.
This is worse than the Ducks episode.
Oh yeah, it is. We had an episode with Ducks Unlimited where Tom and I learned so much about ducks that we were like little kids asking questions. We couldn't stop. We finally had to cut ourselves off.
That's so cool.
But that means we're learning a lot,
yeah.
And that's what I appreciate, how much you're bringing to this, because this has been a complete learning experience for me.
Wonderful.
And, I'm really thrilled that there's a service like the one that Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill cemeteries provide, and that's very important to me. And I love that that's an option for people, and I would hope that that's a model for other places to do the same thing. I would love to see more of this, as opposed to like what's considered traditional. I would love this to be the new traditional.
Yep. Well, there's a Green Burial Council, and the Green Burial Council contributes and helps other cemeteries learn about this option for burial and how important it is. So that's and there's different types of green burials. There can be a restoration. There can be just a natural area in a woodland, things like that. You can certainly check the website of the Green Burial Council website to learn more about that. We have what I would call is almost like a hybrid. It's quite unique. It really is. And if I could also say to your listeners, it is totally accessible. You can come see it at any time. Naturally, this is the fall. It's starting to wind down, and it's going to be entering into the cool season soon. But I would just really recommend people come and see it for yourself. And if we are there, we will absolutely be happy to answer questions, anything that may be. And no question is a silly question, because it's something that it's absolutely very, very important to ask. How else do we find out? And sometimes people think silly questions. They're actually questions that many other people ask as well. So nothing wrong with that. So.
And what I love about your facilities is, even though it's rooted in a sustainable way, it's also embraced technology. Am I correct? It's the first cemetery to have had interactive map on an app where you can.
We sure did have. We have two apps for Laurel Hill and West Laurel Hill Cemetery, which is great. You can actually do a self-guided tour at Laurel Hill that way. Plus, one of the things that was brought to the Arboretum by Aaron, our Arboretum manager, was Tree Keeper, which is it's software that allows the public there's a public module that allows them to look up the trees and see first on their mobile device where they're located, where the tree is, look up a tag number and be able to learn about that tree, what name it is, and if it has any history. It's recorded there. And so Aaron is working on that. And you would really enjoy, I really do think, a podcast with him talking about some of these things, because it's the future for sure.
Wow. It's man, I've learned so much today.
Yeah, no, this is awesome.
I'd like to hear.
One thing, it's a little bit of a sidetrack. Well, not really, but we get asked all the time, like, what are the best plants for deer resistance? And now we actually have the guy who wrote the book.
Yeah,
on here.
You bet.
Now, because we've always felt like, as far as as a native plant nursery, it's very hard because native plants are deer's natural palate. So, in certain times we've seen them eat just about anything. But I know that they have preferences. What would you, to our listeners that hear you comparing deer with deer resistant plants?
But don't say too much, because we got to leave some incentive for people to actually buy your book.
Yes.
Oh, you bet. So in a nutshell, if the native plant is in the mint family, if you look it up and you look up what family it's in the mint family, it's highly unlikely the deer will eat it. Very unlikely. And so there's a deer rating, I guess you could say, let's just call it a rating system in there, from 1 to 10, and 9 to 10 being absolutely almost certain that they will not eat it. But most of the mint family members, there's actually quite a few native plants that fall in that. So if you just stuck in the mint family between Pycnanthemum, Scutellaria, Monarda, things like that, you could easily have a really awesome native plant garden and not have to worry about the deer, which is good. Yep.
And can you throw the name of your book out there for our listeners?
Oh yeah, it's co-authored. I have an author named Ruth Rogers Clausen who wrote Essential Perennials. I think you'll find it very informative. Also, it has cultural information. It has companion plant suggestions and tidbits of information about pollinators, and it's called Deer-Resistant Natives for the Northeast. All
right, awesome.
Yeah.
Make sure you pick that up. I'll make sure. Maybe we'll donate one to our little native plant library.
Yeah. I'm actually embarrassed because I saw it on LinkedIn months ago that it came out, and then I meant to order it for our nursery library, and then when you brought up, I'm like, oh, I forgot all about that. So I'll have to get that on that as well.
No worries.
We'll get that.
Yeah.
So in the time that you've been there now, what would you say is the best part of your job, or the most interesting part of your job? When you walk away, is there one thing that you're like, this is one thing everyone should know about, or this is one thing that makes it all worthwhile?
So yeah, that's always a tough question for me to answer. I'm going to say that one of the things is the ability to create gardens, and gardens to feel good about. That's really what I get to do, and I love it. If you want to just say, Gregg, I'm sorry, the rest of your career, all you can do is create gardens and teach people how to maintain them, I'd say then I'm set, because that's really what. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're getting to do it on such a unique and large scale, which is phenomenal. Not everyone gets that opportunity, so that's beautiful to see.
It's really, yeah.
So what was your path like? We've talked about what you do, but not before that. What was your path like getting into this line of work, and
surely.
What brought you essentially where you ended up where you're at?
Okay, so first of all, I grew up in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. I was very fortunate.
You don't have that Delco accent.
I tried. I've really. Hey, you guys, what can I say? Yeah. So when I got into public speaking for in my jobs, I realized, I have to enunciate better and make sure everybody can understand what I am saying. So
I grew up in Bucks County, and my fiance, every now and then, she's like, "Oh, you're sounding a little Northeast." She kind of keeps me in check every now and then, and I'm like, well, it basically is Northeast. Every now and then, she'll I'll say like a crossed or Trent,
Oh,
and she'll
yeah.
be like, "Yeah, you're staying a little northeast. You gotta
Yeah,
you
that's
gotta reel it
right about.
back a little bit."
Well, it was brought to my attention one time, and I really, it's like totally affected me. But I remember, oh, I can tell you're from Delaware County. You can? Yeah, you just said it. I said, I did? Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good, yeah, good morning to you too. No, it's good morning. Oh, okay. So anyway,
Gotcha.
yeah, that's my Delaware County. So yeah, so I grew up in Delaware County. I grew up in a little area called Chester Heights, not too far from Glen Mills, and I was very fortunate. I had 5 acres to grow up in, and in fact, it was great because it was woodland and it was stream and alluvium and riparian areas along the creeks, and so there were native plants there, and literally just a couple houses away was a woman named Josephine Brenneman, and Josephine Brenneman was dear friends with Dr. Edgar Weary, who was a botanist known for his fern books, and she was also good friends and students of Dr. and Mrs. Barnes of the Barnes Foundation. And this woman took me under her wing. She was my mentor as a teenager, and she started to teach me about native plants that most people never even get to see, like Lygodium palmatum, the climbing fern, native climbing fern, Shortia glacifolia. And so because of her, and naturally my mother was very, encouraging for horticulture, but because of her, I started to understand the importance of native plants and how much I love them. They were a part of where I grew up, in the woods I grew up. And I started a horticultural maintenance business. I did that, went to University of Delaware, did not graduate because I needed to earn a living. I couldn't afford to pay for school, but that was okay. Horticultural maintenance business kept me going. And then I realized I really want to work in public horticulture. I want to teach people. I want to make beautiful gardens that the public can enjoy, not just the private sector. And I applied for the Woods Path gardener position in 2005 at Mount Cuba Center, and I got it. And I like to think the reason I got it was because I was so damn enthusiastic. And also, Mrs. Brenneman taught me about the layers of the woodland and how important all these plants interact with each other, and about the wildlife. And so, having learned that, it was able to get me. I was able to get the job at Mount Cuba Center. I worked there for 8 years. Then had the opportunity to start a brand new public garden in southern Delaware called the Delaware Botanic Gardens. And it definitely had its growing pains. It was starting a garden from scratch. But the wonderful takeaway there was I was able to, with a colleague, a garden designer named Barbara Katz, she and I were both able together to attract Pete Aldoff, who did the High Line in New York, to create a 2-acre meadow. And people say, how did you get Pete on board? And we said, we asked him. We just emailed him and approached him and said, and I sent him a video of the property and said, Pete, if this is of interest, we would love to work with you. And he responded and said, I'm very interested. And so it's 85% native plants, the one at the meadow at Delaware Botanic Gardens. And so I went through a wonderful period there, learned a great deal. And then I wanted to return to the Delaware Valley. That was in southern Delaware. And this horticulturist job opened up at a cemetery. And of course, I was thinking, horticulturist at a cemetery? Boy, did I not know anything. And then I realized there's a lot of horticulture here, a lot of history, and it's back in my hometown in Philadelphia. So here I am.
And you're doing it justice. You're doing it justice.
I like to think so. I would love to have you guys come and visit, and it'd be a pleasure. So
Definitely.
So yeah, please consider it.
Oh, definitely. You don't even have to twist my arm. I'll
Brandon
just
will be
go
there
up.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. If you put it like that, then we can go get something to eat, I guess, for lunch. Yeah. And He's okay. Got it.
Now you're talking our language. Plants
I-
and food.
You know,
we're hanging up the Zoom and heading right there now. This has been wonderful. I know we're running close on time, so we always save the most important and hardest question for last, even though it's the simplest. And that is, what is your favorite native plant?
Yes, honestly. So if I think about all the plants that have inspired me, all the plants that I just have their wow factors, plants that I've grown and so forth, I have to say the one that I love the most is Spigelia marilandica.
No one
Indian.
has mentioned that one before.
Yeah, Indian pink. Yep. Very, very special plant from the Southeast. Gorgeous, gorgeous flowers. And I'm going to feature it in my next book.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
can you share the title of that book, or is that still under wraps right now?
I can. I'm in the process of writing the outline. I don't have a publisher just yet, but
Okay.
it's called The Sensory Appeal of Native Plants.
I like
Yeah.
that. You know, we may have to have Gregg on. So our last episode, we did a whole, which isn't necessarily good for audio podcasting, but for video, Tom and I, one of our coworkers, brought in 10 different bags of seed and kind of smelled the seed to try to identify from smell. And we're
We
thinking,
didn't do well.
we didn't do well at all. No, but we're looking on expanding on that and doing ones with leaves or doing ones with blooms where you can't see what they are and just being able to identify from smell. So maybe you can come in as a guest with us.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
compete.
You bet. The very quickly, the book will basically have 5 chapters: sight, smell, sound, touch, and taste. And I will explain how native plants appeal to all those senses and have some wonderful surprises and stories in there as well. So it's a book that is going to be, for me, my tribute and celebration of native plants, my personal, with very good information naturally, but really it's my, what I can give back to the native plant industry is a celebration of these wonderful plants that that are so important to us.
I love it. I love it. Tom, what do you think about a blindfolded native plant taste test?
I love that one.
I think that's you're coming in for that one, Gregg. We're
Well, then we'll do the native plant simple syrups.
Ooh.
Yeah. And let me tell you, got some stuff for you. Totally.
All right. That's a deal. That is a deal.
Cool. Very cool.
So I think we're getting close to about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So we should probably wrap it up. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah.
Sure.
Final thoughts.
Mhm.
So Gregg, this is we always end with final thoughts. We give you the floor, and you can use it however you want. If you want to summarize or bring up something that we hadn't talked about, or promote something, or however you want to use it, we hand it over, and the time and the space is yours.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Well, I'll make it brief. First of all, I want to thank you guys, really do, because this is a great forum to share this kind of information. And for the listeners, it's wonderful that you have an interest in these things, because native plants are so important. And I could go on for hours about why they're important, but the part about native plants that's important to me is these were the plants that were in the woodlands that were nearby where I grew up. And even for those of us that don't have the woodlands necessarily, they may have the parks and so forth, or just a natural area. But what's important about it is it's a sense of place. It's what I feel is, it's a part of where I live in Delaware County. I can say there's bloodroot and there's native honeysuckle and things like that. But there won't be forever unless we consider conservation and really taking care of what we have. And that's why conservation easements are important. If we have a development, to have a space where some natural space can exist, not only for the trees and the shrubs, but the wildlife, and it's going to benefit us. And so I think I'd like to end on it there. Just remember, don't take for granted these areas that we have, because they're a resource that is so important to us, and we need to preserve them and understand them.
Awesome. That's a great final thought. Tom, do you want me to go, or would you like
I
to
can go, Fran, and
Okay.
that's I've had so many friends, not even just environmentally focused friends, just regular friends that say, oh yeah, when I die, just plant a tree over top of me. Probably not understanding that there's the whole vault and embalming aspect of it too. Even my dad was saying, oh, when I die, I want you to cremate me and then put me in a bunch of seed packets. And then that'll help like grow all these seeds all over the place. But I think he said that somewhat jokingly, I think. But it's nice to know that there are options like this. I was when I first learned about the whole vault and embalming thing. I guess I knew about the embalming, but I didn't realize it was a vault, and you're literally just kind of preserved underground for a long time. Was turned off on that,
Mhm.
and then it kind of seems like cremation might be the only other option. But
Yeah.
no, this is a good option as well. And we say go to your local garden center and ask for them to carry more native plants. Well, maybe you need to go to your local cemetery and present this idea as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Good point. Yep.
There you go. So for mine, I just want to, this has been such an uplifting experience episode for me that I know a lot of our listeners and even we sometimes tend to focus on all the things that are wrong about, there's so many new warehouses popping up, so many things, and we're losing natural areas. But there's also a lot of natural areas that aren't being cared for, that are overrun with invasives that have just declined. So for conservation, you have to think outside of the box. And this is a perfect example of ways to conserve and create natural areas that will be preserved forever. And there will be stewardship involved in it, not just, hey, we were able to save this land and it will always be there. Well, there's some great patches of land that have beautiful trees, but there's no understory, or it's not in great. This is nature that will be stewarded.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that this is just the beginning of it, that we'll see more of that. And it's yeah, we want to stop some of the bad, but I really want to celebrate the good. And this is the good. And I really hope that this is a forward moving trend. And this is something that my kids, by the time they're thinking about their funeral, that this is the most popular option for them, that no one wants the old fashioned cemetery.
Yes.
So I thank you so much for really opening our eyes today and sharing this with us. We could have easily talked to you for another hour and a half. We were just starting to scratch the surface on a lot of this.
Yes.
But
It's been really.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. You bet.
So that wraps it up. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you'd enjoyed listening to Gregg Tepper from West Laurel Hill Cemetery and Laurel Hill Cemetery. For more information, you can visit www.westlaurelhill.com. We don't have the
I didn't
URL
write
for
the
the
Laurel
other
Hill.
one, the Laurel Hill one, but we'll make sure we have that in the show notes
Yes.
for you to look up that. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
We're giving a huge thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our theme music. Make sure you stream or buy their music wherever you consume your music. And live music is back. They're doing plenty of shows in the Manayunk area of Philadelphia, so make sure you go see them if you're in the area. Follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, and YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. We haven't had a call on the question and comment line for an episode or two, so make sure you give us a call at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. Ask a question or leave a comment. We'll play it on a feature episode of The Buzz, and we'll answer it to the best of our abilities, or we'll call a colleague for a good answer. And don't forget the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. Man, it's just growing in leaps and bounds, and all the interaction has been wonderful and kind. So make sure you welcome all the new members and keep it going over there.
You can now buy Native Plants Healthy Planet themed merch. Basically, we have a bunch of T-shirts that we put up, and soon to be hats. I know I've been saying that for a while, but we will have hats at some point.
There's plenty of shirt options right now.
There's plenty of shirt options up there. You can find them at our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. There's a link at the top that says support native plants and buy a T-shirt. Click that, it goes to our Teespring store. 100% of those profits are going to organizations that we've had on. We had our first two with Native Habitat Project and Salin Conservancy, and we're looking for the next one. So
yeah, we're not taking any of that money. It's going right back to all of our guests.
Yep, exactly. So make sure when you listen to us, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or our website, nativeplantshealthyplanet.com, where else are we?
Spotify, Stitcher, all of those,
Stitcher,
Google.
Podbean, really wherever you listen. If you can leave us a 5-star review and so hit subscribe, it really goes a long way. And if you leave a little blurb with your 5-star review, I give you a shout out on a future Buzz episode.
We got a new 5-star review, but they didn't leave any words. So
that means I don't know who to shout out.
You can't give them the listener shout out.
So with that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Greg, thank you again. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day. And then next week we have a very special Halloween Buzz episode.
Halloween and native plants go hand in hand.
Hand in hand. So that's coming up next week. So make sure you tune that. Man, I typically
I'm the one.
You're the one stumbling. All right, let me try this again. Make sure you tune in. Until then, everyone, thank you for joining us. Keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.